Okay, this is lesson 1 in the selection of your tree and also the splitting and the hewing down of the half to the quarters to the, I'll just call that a basic board, and then we're going to go to the slats for the snowshoe frames themselves. But initially, this would be the typical size of a birch I might get. If we can get one that's in a heavy wet area, a loner tree with a lot of the boughs hanging down, that will be a good tree. That promotes a lot of growth, and most of the growth is in the trunk, which gives you big rings. And the importance of these rings is the bending capability of the wood. So this one here has about 4 rings per inch. That would be exceptional. In another component of the tree, you might see where all the rings are compressed. That's not going to be so easy to bend. So when you go in the forest to look for a birch tree, what I usually try and do is cut out a small wedge in the bottom of the tree with a buck saw. And I only usually go in about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Just a tiny wedge. That'll give you an idea of the growth of the tree, regardless of what you think it looks like, to decide whether you're going to select it for snowshoe making or not. If you get a high concentration of birch trees, similar to what would be found on the Churchill Road, where you have massive growths of birch, average size 8 to 14 inches, and they're super long, but all the limbs are growing straight up. I've found that over the years, they're in a high clay area. There's lots of water, but clay, not so much soil. They usually have 15 to 16 rings per inch. And I've found through the futile efforts of trying to bend it, they will, if you take 2 days to cut one up and steam it when the slats are all cut, they will break like a glass rod. So 10, 12 more rings per inch, don't harvest the tree. It's going to be hard enough as you find one that's good. So when we get to this stage here, and we've taken the notch out of the tree in the woods, then we're going to follow it to the predetermined lengths that we want, contingent on what size snowshoes you're making. Whether you're making a small bear paw, a rat tail, or beaver tail. The longest wood that I find to work with is 54 inches. Most of my frames are all split frames. They're not single piece frames. So they're a little bit easier to work with, and it's easier to split the tree at a shorter length. If you were doing one of these snowshoes with a single length frame, it would take you up to about 102 inches. You can't split a tree that long and work with it if it's a 400-pound tree. So when we get the tree harvested, we get it back from the woods, then we've got to get it to thaw for at least 2 days so that the core, the actual core of the tree, is softened up enough that we can split it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to restage and set up and try to pick out the log that we've selected from last week's forest trip to see if this one's going to split, and it'll give us a demonstration of whether it's a good tree or it's a bad tree. Okay, now that we've got a questionable piece of wood, what we're looking for is to see where any twist would be or any major knots. You can't split down through a knot because that'll go right to the core of the tree, and they're very difficult. It's almost like a 6-inch spike in it. Now if you can notice in here, with a close-up, you'll see that this is a particular flat spot of the tree. Now if this ran to the full length, it would be almost guaranteed that it's going to split straight. But if we look at this one and follow this flat spot, we can see that there's a bit of a twist or a spiral. So it's going to be questionable whether this whole tree will be salvageable once we try and split it. If it runs out in the grain and it doesn't split in half, not necessarily straight, but in half, then there's going to be significant wastage. Now I'm going to block this so that it doesn't want to roll away on me too much, and see if it's going to work. Now it looks like it's going to spiral. Too badly though. So if you notice, we started here and we figured it was going to go along this line. Now in order to cause the wedging effect of the axe to make it prematurely run out, we're going to keep the tension here, but we're going to put another one in here. That'll keep this apart, but might make it want to stay a little bit truer for us. Get this one out and trade places. And we see we got a few fibers in here. That's more, all these long fibers into the core are the ones that seem to hang on a little bit. So we're going to just snip them off. Let's do it again. Get everything out of the way. Oops. Take this other big guy and try and finish it off. Hold it apart so we can get these fibers here cut. That's just how to do it. There it is. Not so bad. Easily salvageable. What we'll see now when we advance this is because the tree split with a little bit of a twist, that's how we're going to have to cut it on the saw. So that we're perpendicular to the rings, but parallel to the edge of the tree. Okay, now that we got this brute all split, what we have to figure out is the best way to quarter it to get rid of the waste wood, and then see how much we're going to be able to get from the outside in. The core of the tree is no good. The core tree has too many little bird's eyes, little black roots, or excuse me, little black knots, and it just won't. You can see some of the core rot here in this stuff, and these little tiny knots, like there, they will cause that whole. If you tried to cut a board with that, it would just split. So we've got it in half. And we don't have a clean end to see the rings, but predominantly they're probably about 6 or 7 to the inch. So we're going to go back to this template. Now what we've done, for all intents and purposes, is we've split the tree. So we're going to take a half to work with. Now, what we have to do is we have to quarter it. And we'll pick one of these quarters. And what we'll do here is, because this is only about 5 inches with an extra set of hands, you can split this on the bandsaw, and the only trick is that you have to be a little bit off center, and I'll explain why in a second. A little bit off center, but because the tree has a little bit of a twist and a bend, you can't just set it up on the saw and go straight through the blade. You have to follow this tree the way it's grown, as in the little bit of bend or curvature, but you also have to twist the log as it's going through the saw to keep on that center line, but parallel with the twist in it. So the starting point would be, if we go back to this template, is we're going to put this quarter on the saw and we're going to try to get rid of most of the waste. Now in this particular quarter, all of this is waste wood. So what we'll do is we'll take one of these. It's a smaller tree, a little bit easier to handle for demonstration purposes. We're going to take this half and we're going to quarter it. And then we're going to get rid of the waste off of this component here. Now when we get rid of the waste, then we'll further how to set up, because you want all your cuts, if you look at the rings, you'd want the rings to be perpendicular to your cut line, because you want them all to be able to bend with the grain. And what you'll find is if we tried to progress just cutting square boards all across this component that we have, we'd end up with, hey, the lines are starting to get a little diagonal to the surface. And if we progress this way, they're even more diagonal. What happens in a case like this is the grain runs out. And when you try to bend it, it just splits in your hands. So this is what you don't do, the way you cut it. What we'll do is we'll get to this stage here, and we'll see then how we can mark up another clean quadrant here to best get the most wood as possible out of each quarter. So now I'm going to lay this down and we're going to set the saw up to split this smaller one, because right now this one's a little bit too heavy for one person because of the 55-56 inch length of it with the table saw without some vertical supports.